The steel of the pre-plague scalpel was cold and perfect. Jonas Alder turned it under the weak light filtering through the grimy, boarded window, watching the gleam travel from hilt to tip. He wiped it with an alcohol-soaked cloth, a ritual of precision in a world of chaos. On the corner of the table, a faded photograph of a smiling woman and a young boy served as a constant, silent accusation. Jonas did not look at it. He did not have to. It was burned onto the back of his eyelids. The front door of the apothecary did not open. It splintered. A man stumbled through the shattered frame, a walking skeleton held together by rags and desperation. His breath was a wet, ragged sound, the signature of the red cough in its final act. He was not alone. He shoved a small girl forward, his hand leaving a grimy print on her shoulder. "Take her." The man's voice was a rasp of tearing tissue. He collapsed against a ruined shelf, his legs giving out. "She's clean, immune." Jonas stood, the scalpel still in his hand. He looked from the dying man to the child. She was small, wiry, her dark hair chopped short around a face smudged with dirt. Her eyes, wide and unnervingly calm, fixed on him. She clutched a worn rag doll to her chest. "Ethelgard Station," the man gasped, a string of bloody saliva tracing a path down his chin. "They can use her. A cure." His eyes rolled back. A final, shuddering cough shook his frame, and then he was still. The silence that followed was heavier than before, now occupied by the small, breathing presence of the girl. Jonas set the scalpel down. His hand trembled, a betraying tremor of exhaustion and something else. The tip of the blade nicked his thumb. A single, perfect bead of crimson welled up. He swore under his breath, shaking his hand. The drop of blood spattered onto the dusty tabletop near the girl. A fly, drawn by the scent, buzzed down from the ceiling. It landed near the red bead. It took 2 steps, its legs twitching. Then it stopped, folded, and died. Another followed, landing directly on the edge of the blood. It convulsed once and fell still. Jonas stared at the 2 dead insects. His scientific mind, the part of him he thought long dead, stirred. This was not immunity. This was an anomaly. He looked at the girl. Sela. The man had not named her, but the name surfaced in his mind, a ghost of its own. She had not moved. Her gaze was unwavering, a silent question he could not answer. Then his eyes drifted to the photograph, to the smiling woman and the laughing boy. They were the reason the world was like this. His failure. He looked back at the girl, at the dead flies, at the impossible hope, and the terrifying mystery she represented. Ethelgard Station. It was a fool's errand, a ghost town of failed science. But it was also a direction, a purpose. The world smelled of rot and rust. Jonas placed one foot carefully on the slick spine of a submerged sedan, his weight sinking the worn boot just enough to send a ripple across the stagnant green water. Each step was a calculation of balance and decay. His back ached under the weight of their supplies. Ahead, Sela moved with a weightless grace that defied the oppressive humidity, a small, silent figure navigating the graveyard of the interstate. A low, tuneless hum vibrated from her chest, a constant counterpoint to the drone of insects. A wet, rasping sound cut through the air. It came from the shattered window of a half-drowned minivan to their left. Jonas froze, his hand tightening on Sela's shoulder. A face, pale and mottled, appeared in the opening. Its eyes were milky, its jaw slack. A breather. It clawed weakly at the rusted doorframe, its labored breaths echoing like a clogged drain. "Back," Jonas whispered, pulling Sela away from the minivan and onto the precarious concrete median. His foot slipped on a patch of slick algae. He pinwheeled, his heavy pack shifting violently. The meticulously wrapped medical kit, his last bastion of scientific order, tore free from its strap. It hit the concrete with a dull thud and skidded over the edge, landing in the murky water with a soft gulp. It vanished beneath the surface. For a second, he stared at the spot, a hollow ache opening in his gut. The breather thrashed, drawn by the sound. There was no choice. He grabbed Sela's arm and pulled her onward, leaving his instruments to the silt and the grime. They rested minutes later on the roof of a dry-docked delivery truck, its logos peeled away by sun and rain. A flock of crows circled a listing school bus nearby, their calls sharp and hungry. Sela's hum was steady, almost serene. As Jonas watched, the birds broke their pattern, veering away from the bus and disappearing over the kudzu-choked walls of the highway. A coincidence. It had to be. Then he saw it. Through a gap in a suffocating green canopy, a structure of impossible solidity rose against the gray sky. The bastion, a sheer wall of concrete, clean and absolute. Hope, sharp and unfamiliar, pierced through his exhaustion. They were close. He slid off the truck, landing with a splash in the ankle-deep water. Sela followed without a sound. They moved toward the base of the dam, toward the promise of sanctuary. They were 20 yards from a steel gate when the men appeared. They did not emerge from the gate, but materialized from the shadows beside it, moving with a silent, disciplined efficiency. They were dark shapes, armed and ready. Their leader stepped forward. He was a block of a man, his shaved head catching the dull light. A jagged scar cleaved his face in two. His eyes, cold and assessing, settled on Jonas, then flickered to Sela. "Stop there." The voice was flat, hard as the concrete behind him. "On your knees, both of you." The heavy glass door groaned open, a sound of protest after years of silence. Jonas pushed it just wide enough for them to slip through, his shoulder aching in protest. Inside, the air was dead. It tasted of dust and forgotten chemicals. A sanctuary, he had thought, watching its bulk rise against the bruised twilight. Sanctuaries, he was now learning, were just well-preserved tombs. Sela's small hand found his. Her fingers were a fragile weight, a tether to the reason he kept moving. She looked up at the peeling murals on the wall. Cartoon elephants and smiling giraffes watched them with faded, cheerful eyes. Her own eyes, wide and unnervingly calm, held a new wariness learned in the cellars of the bastion. He led them past a reception desk, papers still fanned out across its surface as if the clerk had just stepped away for a coffee that never came. His limp was worse now, a throbbing fire that started in his ankle and shot up his leg. He needed supplies. Antiseptics. Bandages. More than that, he needed proof. He needed a document, a chart, a single line of text that confirmed Sela was the cure, that all of this had a point beyond simple survival. The real research would be deeper in. He found a stairwell, the metal steps ringing with each pained footfall. The basement was colder, the air thick with the ghost of ozone and refrigeration. A heavy steel door marked BIO Safety, Level 4 stood at the end of a short corridor. The seal was broken. Inside, it was a capsule from the final days. Stainless steel counters gleamed under a film of dust. Beakers and petri dishes sat in silent, orderly rows. On a central table, a stack of manila folders lay open. Project Nightingale. He picked one up. The paper was brittle. He scanned the abstract. Research into asymptomatic amplification in pediatric subjects. A knot tightened in his stomach. He read on, his eyes flying across tables of data, viral load counts, transmission vectors. The subjects in these studies did not get sick. They showed no symptoms, but the virus thrived inside them, mutating, strengthening. They became silent amplifiers, walking epicenters of the plague. He dropped the folder, its contents spilling across the floor. He saw another file, this one thinner, a patient intake form. He knelt, his bad leg screaming. The subject ID was a string of numbers. He barely saw them. His focus was on a small section, genetic marker, KR9. KR9. He knew that marker. He had isolated it himself from Sela's blood sample weeks ago, a unique sequence he had celebrated as the key to her immunity, the foundation of his hope. He looked at the data again, his mind refusing to make the connection his eyes already had. The viral load counts for the KR9 subject were exponentially higher than any other carrier, an order of magnitude more infectious. A perfect, silent delivery system. A floorboard creaked upstairs. She had followed him. She stood in the doorway of the lab, a small silhouette against the dim light of the corridor, humming a quiet, tuneless melody. She was not the cure. She was the plague, magnified. And he, Dr. Jonas Alder, had been her deliverman, leading her across the wasteland like a holy relic, a promise of salvation that was in fact a guarantee of extinction. Then another sound cut through the silence, a shout, sharp and clear from outside, the crunch of boots on gravel, the metallic clatter of a rifle bolt being drawn. They were here. Corbin was here. Jonas looked from the damning file in his hand to the innocent girl in the doorway, and the walls of the tomb began to close in. The wind on the ridge was a physical thing. It tore at Jonas's patched coat and tried to steal the air from his lungs. Below, the sterile geometry of Ethelgard Station hummed with a power that felt obscene in the dead world. Between him and the station stood the scientists, their clean lab coats flapping like the wings of carrion birds. Behind him, blocking the path back down the mountain, stood Corbin and his flock, faces hard as the rock under their feet. Sela's hand was a knot in his, her small frame pressed against his leg. The girl is a blight. Corbin's voice was gravel rolling downhill. A vessel for the plague. The bastion must be kept pure. His followers shifted, the scrape of a machete leaving its sheath a dry, final sound. From the other side, a woman with a severe face and drawn, hungry eyes stepped forward. Dr. Eris. She is not a blight, you fanatic. She is an asset. The key. Her biology is the only thing that matters now. Her voice was sharp, clinical, slicing through the wind. Give her to us, Jonas. It's for the greater good. The greater good. The phrase was a disease, a justification for any horror. He had lived his life by it, chased it through labs and quarantine zones, and it had led him here, to this barren strip of rock, ready to hand a child over to men who would kill her for purity, or men who would dissect her for progress. They were two heads of the same monster. He looked down at Sela. Her unnervingly calm eyes were fixed on his, a flicker of fear finally showing in their depths. It was the first real question she had ever asked him. What will you do? Redemption was not a variable in an equation. It was not a cure waiting in a petri dish. He realized it with a clarity that felt like a physical blow. It was the weight of this child's hand. It was the trust in her gaze. It was the simple, impossible act of keeping her safe. Everything else was just a more elaborate way of failing. Without a word, Jonas knelt. He shrugged off his pack, his movements slow, deliberate. Corbin's men tensed. The scientists took a half step forward. He ignored them. From the pack, he pulled a small, dense object, a salvaged fuel canister, wired to a battery pack and a simple kitchen timer. His fingers, grimy and trembling slightly, turned the dial. The soft clicks were swallowed by the wind. Then at Dr. Eris, he saw the same confusion on their faces. They expected a plea, a bargain. They did not expect this. He shoved the device deep into a crack in the rock, halfway between the two groups. He scooped Sela into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, a bundle of bones and fierce will. Hold on, he whispered against her tangled hair. Then he ran. Not towards salvation or damnation, but sideways, along the exposed spine of the ridge, toward the dark, unwelcoming maw of the forest. A muffled whump echoed behind them, followed by a thick, boiling cloud of black, acrid smoke. Shouts turned to choked coughs. The chaos was his cover, the science of combustion and panic, his only prayer. They plunged into the trees, the world dissolving into a green and brown blur. The forest swallowed them whole. Days bled into weeks. He taught her how to read a trail, how to find north by the moss on a tree. She taught him which mushrooms were safe, her small finger pointing out what his educated eyes had missed. They moved through a world that did not care about cures or purity, only about the rain and the sun and the turning of the seasons. One evening, by a stream that ran clear and cold over smooth stones, he watched her. She wasn't an asset. She wasn't a blight. She was a 9-year-old girl, tracing a circle on a wet rock with her finger. The world was still broken. He had not fixed it. By every measure of his old life, he was a failure. But here, in the quiet twilight of everything, he felt a sense of peace. This was his last good act. It would have to be enough.